All right, folks, congratulations on surviving to the last session of MIX on St. Patrick's Day. I have no idea who it was I upset to get the last session on the last day on St. Paddy's Day, but apparently I need to pay a bigger bribe next year. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for surviving. I see there's a few folks' faces look like they enjoyed themselves in the Luxor nightclub last night. Yeah, a few nodding heads. Most people still awake. Well, hopefully we'll try and keep you entertained. And I have a couple of incentives to keep everybody awake. So to save me looking stupid, which is always a favorite topic of mine, I have a selection of these rather stylish God Mode t-shirts to give away for particularly interesting questions, or if I'm about to really screw up with some of my coding and you catch me before I build, you get a free t-shirt. I've also got a couple of books and some vouchers to give away. There's one caveat with the t-shirts. That is, when you come to get it, you've got to be able to explain what the reference is on the shirt. You don't just get the free shirt, you've got to be in the know and know what we're talking about when we talk about God Mode. As part of talking about quality and how to improve software quality, I'm going to talk about testing tools for the majority of my time, but I'm also going to talk about the relationship between developers and testers and how we make it better. That means I'm actually going to be flipping back and forth a fair amount between playing the role of a developer and playing the role of a tester. And to make it easy for you to understand which role I'm fulfilling at any point in time, you'll be able to tell when I'm playing the role of a developer, because I'll be wearing this particularly stylish cowboy hat. So just think developers, cowboys. And then when I'm playing the role of a tester, I'll be wearing this even more stylish grumpy hat. All right? So I can't guarantee to get the sequencing right, but you get the idea. When I'm wearing a hat, I'm playing a role. When I'm not wearing a hat, I'm just being boring old Ewan. All right, so the topic of the session is improving software quality for the modern web. And really what I'm going to spend my time doing is talking about tools and processes with a focus on the agile, but not exclusively. We'll talk about how non-agile improvements can be made. And I'm going to look at the Visual Studio tools. But I'm also going to reference, where it makes sense, tools in the open source space. I don't have any open source tool demos. If we have time, I've got a Sugar CRM demo I might show you, because it's a kind of classical, what we call forms over data app that is a real bear for testers to test. But it's mostly going to be focused on the 2010 tooling, but I'm happy to talk about the other stuff as well. So the first question to really ask is, do we still need to care about quality? You're here at MIX, there's all this cool, shiny stuff, there's services and clouds and phones and all sorts of other things like that. So do we really need to care about quality anymore? Right? There are infinite number of products out there which have been in perpetual beta. Right? I was sat at the back of the room and there was 2 or 3 people using a famous mail website, which I think holds the world record for being in beta for the longest of any product, even more so than anything from Microsoft. Right? But we have changed the way we think about software, and we have changed what it means to ship, what it means to be production ready. And we'll talk a little bit at the end about what it means to really deal with software quality in a services cloud world. But we'll take a more traditional approach for the first part of the presentation. So let's take a look at some great examples of things that we all have contributed to, or I should say our industry. I'm not blaming anybody here for any of the things I'm about to show you. If you were part of any of them, I suggest you keep your hands stuffed firmly underneath you. So should we really care about quality? So let's take a look at an example. Oh, no, let's not take a look at an example. Let's take a look at how much it actually costs us, first of all. Software bugs cost the US economy an estimated $59 billion with a B every single year in lost productivity, lost transactions, frustration. It would be interesting, given the current focus on healthcare in the United States, how much Prozac and everything else is being prescribed as a result of software bugs as well. Interesting fact, it costs 10 times more to fix a bug later in the cycle than it does earlier in the cycle. Now you can argue where that is, and there's books and studies and papers and all sorts of interesting stuff you can go take a look at, but basically the curve only goes one way. It goes from little small piece up the way the further in the cycle that you go. Very expensive. How many people here regard themselves as a professional coder? Raise your hands. Okay, so most of the room. Obviously the 100 to 150 errors are not yours, they're the guy in the cubicle next to you, but he's obviously more than making up for you when it comes to the average. That's a really scary number. That means more than 10% of the code we write as an industry has errors in it first time round. Wow, do we need to care about quality? Maybe. So let's take a look at some examples. So let's take a look at something a little more concrete that some of these you'll recognize. The older amongst you will recognize some of them more than others. So our first example, the world's first smart ship, run by more than 20 servers. The Navy and the military in general are trying to reduce manpower, particularly on big, expensive ships which have thousands of people, by having automation systems. In this particular case, somebody forgot to test what happens when you enter 0 in a particular field. So they got a divide by 0 error. Well, occasionally you get those on a web page or whatever. How bad can it be? Well, in the case of a warship, pretty bad. Shut down the propulsion system. And because of the number of servers, it took more than 2 hours to reboot them all and bring everything back to life. And depending on which urban legend you happen to pay attention to, it may or may not have had to be towed back to port. When I was researching all these, I tried to get very factual classic errors for you. And this one, there's enough urban legends to sink a battleship, strangely enough, around whether it was or wasn't towed back to port. But the actual error occurred. A European one, Ariane 5, which is a very successful rocket these days, used very heavily by the European Space Agency, made lots of money. But when they built it, they basically copied and pasted the Ariane 4 guidance system. Because really Ariane 5 was 4 with bigger boosters on it. But the rocket took a different path because of the different boosters, which were more powerful. Okay, anybody want to guess what happens next? Yeah, conversion from a 64-bit float to a 16-bit signed int caused an overflow. Luckily, they did have an exception handling case, but it had been disabled for perf reasons. Cost somewhere north of 370 million US dollars at 1996 prices. I'm not enough of an economist to be able to work out what that means today, but that's a lot of money. Potentially the world's most expensive copy and paste bug ever. For those of you who are not a plane nerd like I am, I'm a former RAF pilot, so that's why there's a little military thing going on here. This is the F-22 Raptor. It is probably the most advanced manned aircraft that will ever fly, because the thing that replaces it in 20 or 30 years will be run by computers. Okay, hold on. That doesn't seem such a good idea given the previous 2 slides, but hold that thought. So they were deploying the Raptor to Japan for the first time. And what's one of the things you have to do when you go to Japan from the United States? You cross over the international date line. Unfortunately, nobody had actually catered for that particular case. And the Raptor is so advanced that when the computers crashed, when it crossed the date line, they lost all navigation, all communications. Luckily, for the world's most advanced aircraft, they had just done an air-to-air refueling, and they were able to follow the tankers all the way back to Hawaii, completely freaking out the tanker pilots who were wondering why they had 6 fighters trailing them all the way back in again, because, of course, the radios didn't work and they couldn't actually explain why they were being followed. So these are fairly dramatic examples, and they're all real-time systems-related problems, but we live in a real-time world in terms of everything needs computers to run. This is MIX, so maybe we need something a little more visual, something a little more down-to-earth, something that everybody in the room can maybe relate to. I'll start with the product I work on, Visual Studio. You know, I'm not a Windows guy, but shutting down eWindows system doesn't seem like the smartest move on the planet to be able to enable myself to actually install anything, or in fact do anything at all with Windows. Everybody's had one of these. XP, Vista, Windows 7. Come on, admit it. Everybody's had one of these. I'm particularly proud, actually, that the tester, obviously, of this dialogue put a stress case in where it was, in fact, going to take more than 10,000 days to copy this particular file. So I think congratulations to the tester on this particular case. Perhaps a tester in another part of the product could have found some other problem in an algorithm somewhere, but we'll let them away with that for now. I particularly like this one. You know, being Scottish by birth, I wouldn't say I have the strongest command of the English language, but even I might have picked this one up in review on the way through. And we'll close with a former product of mine. I worked on the SQL Server team for many years. The good news is Management Studio has correctly identified a really serious error has occurred. The bad news is it can't actually tell you what it was. But that's okay because you know something bad happened. All right, so I've deliberately poked fun at Microsoft a little bit. And the internal version of this deck is a lot longer than the version I'm using with you today. But hopefully you've all seen something here. And I'm picking on our stuff because it's a safe thing to do. I have a version of this deck which doesn't include any Microsoft software. It might include software that you helped contribute to, or a website that you worked on. Software quality is something which we're not very good at sometimes in our industry. Part of that's a people problem, part of it's a training problem, part of it's a process problem, and part of it's a tools problem. And we'll talk a little bit about how we can address some of that as this presentation goes on. What I'm going to talk about is what we should be testing, when we should be testing, and how we should be testing. There is no one way to test. There is no one thing to test. There is no right time to test. The answer is it depends. It depends on the people. It depends on the skills of those people. It depends on the project. I do work, or I used to do work with a very large, very famous .com website that used to be #1 in the world. And they do some phenomenal engineering things, just amazing engineering things. I'm always in awe when I work with them. And I remember when they hired a QA lead for the first time, because all the testing had been done by developers originally. And developers were given 6 weeks to develop a feature, so these 6-week sprints before they moved into production. And so I asked this new QA lead, so, as part of your role, how's that going to play into the whole sprint model? He goes, well, yeah, we're going to get 2 hours to test at the end, just to make sure they didn't do anything really dumb. So the developers get 6 weeks, and the testers get 2 hours. Wow, that really doesn't seem like the right mix. Or does it in an online world? Historically, we've kind of joked about QA being referred to as Mordak, the preventer of software. Any Dilbert fans in the room? Dilbert, yeah? Right, so there's a character in Dilbert called Mordak, the preventer of IT, who goes wandering around unplugging things and making sure people can't use their computers. And sometimes testers are seen as people who get in the way of releasing software. And so the goal here is to try and talk about how testers and developers can partner together to solve problems together and not just have a bunch of stuff thrown over the wall, give it a quick cursory glance, and then continue to throw it over the wall. So this is a view of testing which comes from a gentleman called Brian Marek. Brian was one of the original authors of the Agile Manifesto and is very famous in the world of Agile testing. And that's one of the reasons I have this up here. But while it's called the Agile Testing Quadrant, it's a phenomenally singular view to think about testing. I'm going to talk about this slide in detail as we go through. And there's multiple reasons that I'm a fan of this slide, and I've worked with teams of mine at Microsoft to help drive some of the principles behind here. There are multiple reasons to do things in the testing space with software. One is make it the right thing for the business, right? A business-facing testing. Another is technology testing. It's something that we excel at Microsoft. There are literally tens of millions of automated tests in Visual Studio. I won't tell you how many, but it's a lot. A bunch of them are really good user-centric tests, and every one of you who uses Visual Studio will be using the product the way that the tester has written the test. But a bunch of you would look at some of these test cases and go, why on earth are you doing that? That's kind of nerdy, right? And that's from a user of Visual Studio to see it's nerdy. Okay, so there's technology-facing tests, but we also have critiquing the product. Is it the right product? One of the things we've talked a lot about at MIX over the years, and here, when you think about somebody like what Bill Buxton was saying, is everything is context sensitive. The user experience is context sensitive. The testing is context sensitive. Making sure you do the right type of testing for the right app is really important. The sorts of things that if you're knocking up some new .com that you thought of last week and you want to ship 2 weeks from now, versus the sorts of testing you would do for that smart ship, very different. Different skills, different tools, different approaches. And so these are the different quadrants. The one I want to call out here that is really an Agile thing, but we should all think about, is supporting the team. One of the great things about Agile, whether you follow big Agile A, the religion, or you follow small Agile A in terms of, hey, we just want to be a little more responsive to what we're doing, is the team helps define its own success. And by helping the team turn and say, you know what? Testing's taking too long because we're doing too much manual testing, or our tests are not stable enough, or they're not the right tests. We as a team are going to decide to automate some more tests. Team, not developers, not testers, not program managers, team. And so this nature of supporting the team, and there are certain types of tests which are as good for the team as they are for the customer, is a very interesting notion. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through each one of these quadrants, and we'll talk about them in detail, and we'll demo some ways to solve some of the problems. So the first one I'm going to talk about is unit testing. Wow, that gray, oh, it does come up here. My repeater monitor, I just lost everything. It's like, no, so you can't see the gray. So hopefully by now, everybody kind of gets that unit tests are important. We've talked about MVC, we talked about MVVM in Silverlight and WPF world. Unit testing makes a tremendous difference to what we do. And I'm not going to demo unit testing. We have unit testing at Microsoft. We have the MS Test framework, good open source frameworks. NUnit is the granddaddy on .NET. XUnit.NET is the kind of the rebirth of the granddaddy because it was the same guy. The MB unit guys are doing cool stuff. One thing there's not a shortage of on the .NET platform is unit testing frameworks. If you haven't played with one, go. Play, experiment, learn, have fun. Your software will be of higher quality if you do some unit testing. But here's an interesting thing. Despite all of the evidence, we're not doing it. This is from a survey that Telerik did a little while ago. How often do you write unit tests? Basically 50% don't, and then another 25% sometimes, which basically says not enough. Interesting question. Why don't we write unit tests? The evidence is pretty clear in terms of the impact to the product. No time, too hard. There is this real challenge that we face as developers in the industry, which comes from the fact that tests take time away from coding the product, and therefore they get in the way of shipping the product, right? But if you get a return on investment, then it was worthwhile spending. How many people who are developers in the room, raise your hands and be honest, have ever written a piece of code, let's call it a method or a function, so it's more than one line, and then have shipped it exactly as is 6 months or a year later? Raise your hands. All right, so we've got 3 guys who are confident in the room. You gentlemen I'm going to speak with afterwards. Okay? So the rest of you are like me. I write code, I think I'm doing the right thing, and then as the app evolves, new features come out, or I just realize I didn't do a good job of implementing the thing, I go back and change stuff. When I change stuff, how do I know that the thing I changed was the right thing and that I didn't screw up something else that was already working? Well, I test it manually. Wow, if you do a lot of refactoring, or if your app changes a lot because you're shipping every month or every couple of months, or you're responding to your users, you're listening to what your users are asking for, then that's a lot of manual testing. If you had some unit tests, just the key ones, not 100% code coverage, but just the important ones, would you feel more secure in your refactoring or your changes? Maybe, yes. Could you help guarantee the quality of the builds because you can run unit tests, and that way the chucklehead in the other cubicle who adds 100 and 150 errors for every 1,000 lines of code, he doesn't screw up your build the next day because he was the guy who checked in the errors. So maybe you want him to write the unit tests and you're okay without them. But that's a starting point. So here's something to take back to your organizations if you're not doing unit testing. This is a joint study done by Microsoft and IBM Research. This is public. You can go download this. We took a couple of projects at Microsoft and a couple of projects at IBM, and we measured various statistics. Now, this is TDD, but the principle of unit testing still applies here. And look at these numbers. Even if you were a pessimist, for an increased development cost of 15 to 35%, let's take the high estimate, so we'll say 35%. You can get a defect reduction of 40 to 90. Let's be pessimists. Let's take the low number. So for an extra 35% cost, you get defect reduction of 40%. Okay, that seems like a positive thing to me. And that doesn't even cover the confidence, the improved quality of the builds and things like that. So if you're not doing unit testing today, take a look at it. It is hard. And TDD is a mindset that takes a while to get used to. I get into all sorts of religious wars with the TDD guys at Microsoft. It's like, my goal is to have 1 million developers using unit testing. I'd be ecstatic if 1 million people were doing TDD because I think you'll get the most bang for the buck. But not everybody can do TDD. And really, TDD is not so much about testing. It's about the quality of the design, because you're designing through the tests. The tests in reality are a side effect. So you can do unit testing, but invest in unit testing. And it's our job to help give you the evidence to go to your bosses and turn around and say, hey, look, the Microsoft guys say they have these hard numbers. Unit testing really does help you. Enough on unit testing. Let's take another quadrant. You know, exploratory testing in particular and manual testing in general get a really bad rep in our industry. If you talk to the Agilists, they will say that manual testing is evil, that it is debt which you need to pay down. Okay? The right type of manual testing is not evil. The right type of exploratory testing or scenario testing, or UAT, is mandatory. The users have to sign off on the software. Somebody has to turn around and say, it's ready to ship, go do it. Who is that person? But by being smart about how we do exploratory testing in general, we can make use of this as an asset. This is a skill which we can use organizationally. So this is a quote from Mike Cohen. Anybody know who Mike Cohen is? He's another one of the Agile guys. But I really, again, this is another really good one, which is, you know what? If you've got too much manual testing, the right answer is not to turn around and go automate all of it. Why? Because not all tests are suitable for automation. And you can't go from a manual testing org straight to a fully automated org overnight and get the benefits. So his guidance is this: stop the bleeding. So in other words, don't write any new manual tests that could be written automated. So write the new stuff automated if you can. Stay current. Start to get the new areas of code covered effectively. And then at some point you have to catch up on your debt. The last one you could say was a stretch. If I think about some of the multi-million line code bases that I've seen customers have, getting caught up could take a year or more. And that may not be possible. But certainly you can protect the new stuff. And as you refactor, re-engineer, you can bring up and move into the more automated space. This is a very interesting quote, and it's Mike Cohen quoting Brian Marek, who's the guy from earlier. What they're basically saying is, getting in progress against your manual tests doesn't necessarily mean writing automated tests. Automate the population of the databases. Automate the setup and the configuration. Automate navigating to the right page. Think about the classic line of business app. You could be 20 screens into it before you get to the new functionality you're actually supposed to be testing. How error-prone is it for a poor manual tester to sit and go, okay, I've got to type in 30 fields on one screen, and then 20 fields on another screen, and then 10 fields on another screen before I get to the new calculation module or the new checkout module? What are the chances of them getting that right every time and therefore making the test case valid? Relatively low in the grand scheme of things. If I was doing that 50 or 100 times a day, I'd get it wrong. I don't know about you guys, but I certainly would get it wrong. And so the idea here is think about the easy wins in terms of automation. Reduce the time the team is spending on non-core things. And enough with the slides, and let's go and do a little bit of a demo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of exploratory testing. I am going to be playing the... No, I'm not going to be playing the role of developer yet. I'm going to be playing the role of the grumpy tester. One that Nico, who's in the front row, will tell you I portray particularly well, as he and I worked together for a number of years. All right, so I'm going to use a new tool here. I'm not going to spend a ton of time showing it to you. This is Microsoft Test Manager. This is a new tool in VS 2010. This is targeted at what we call the generalist tester. Doesn't require Visual Studio install, as a separate SKU, which is kind of cheaper than most of the other SKUs. And that's all I'm going to say about it. All right, so I already have an exploratory test case written here, and I'm going to go ahead and run this test case and show you what I mean by intelligent exploratory testing, how we add value in the exploratory testing sense and don't just make it a casual ramble around the application. Okay, so the first thing is the app changes into this mode of running a test. I've run it before because I actually rehearsed, although you might not think that as the demo goes on. So I already have a recording here. I'm going to just start from scratch. So the first thing is, if you take a look at my test case, you'll see it's really not a really big test case. Evaluate adding new groups, adding context to them, and deleting them. We have a contact management app, and what we did was we added the ability to have groups of contacts in the contact management app. In this case, the contact management app happens to be an ASP.NET MVC Ajax application. You can download it from the MVC site. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to launch the application. I'm going to do some testing. So I'm going to test it in IE. So it launches, and luckily I have a shortcut for it. And here's the managed contact groups. This is a new functionality. So we'll go ahead and we'll add a new group, and we'll call it Conference Friends. All right, so as a tester, that seemed to work okay. Let me go and add some contacts to that new group. So we'll go ahead and add Conference Friends, and we'll say John, oops, spelled it wrong though. We'll say John Galloway, who happened to be the guy who wrote the sample. And then we'll give his email as, not me, that would be bad, john@somewhere.com. Now, being a tester, I'm not going to take the easy path first. First thing I'm going to do, if I can find the delete key, is I'm going to try putting an empty name in. Okay, so I get errors straight away. That's good, that's kind of what I would expect, except this invalid email address. Wow, that seems like a valid email address. Well, you know what, maybe there's something weird going on with the double verification, so I'll leave that for now. We'll fix this, we'll put John in. And then we'll go ahead and we'll take Galloway out, and we'll test that. Last name's required. Okay, good so far. And then we'll say it's a 3-digit final number. Okay. Let's go ahead and try and create. Everything should now be valid. Wow, it says invalid email address. Well, this definitely seems like a bug to me in the validation. So let me go ahead and file a bug. Well, to file the bug, first of all, I want to do is take a screenshot. So we'll just do integrated screenshot. We'll capture a rectangular area in this particular case. I could have just taken the full screen, but we'll just take a little small one. You can see that's been added in here. I'm going to mark this test case as fail. And now I'm going to go ahead and we'll say, weird stuff is happening with email field. All right. Now I'm going to go ahead and actually file this as a bug. I have TFS running on here for those of you who know what TFS is. This is a bug tracking system. So I'm going to create an exploratory bug, and I'll explain what that actually means in a second. So you notice I get this little time range thing pops up. Well, this exploratory test case was really quick. It only took me 2 minutes, 29 seconds to find a bug. Yes, I am a tester. But in reality, it could have taken me 20 minutes, half an hour. It could have taken me a bunch of time. And I don't want to pollute the bug with a whole bunch of stuff which may not be that interesting to whoever's going to go look at the bug, i.e. the developer. I want to give the developer the best bug I can to give him the best chance of going ahead and fixing it. So what I'm going to do then is say, in this particular case, I want all 2 hours, 29 minutes. I could move the slider, and what you didn't see happen was in the background, I'm recording a bunch of stuff that I'm about to show you. If I was to move the slider, it would truncate all that information at the boundary. So we'll use the range to create a bug. And what's going to pop up now is the bug form from Team System. We'll give it weird email stuff. Okay, that's our title. Now you can see that it's automatically put the state, the reason is a new bug, the area and the iteration if you're familiar with TFS. We'll say it's assigned to demo user, who is me. And you'll see a bunch of information has been added in here automatically. So here I can see the screenshot that I just took if I click on it. If the handler is actually going to work. Hello? So there's the screenshot. Okay, so the screenshot got copied in. And I have some other stuff that I'm going to show you. There's this system information thing, which is a bunch of information about the system under test. It's kind of interesting. It's good to know what I was actually testing on. Find the bug form, which is now gone away. And in here, if I take a look at this thing, there's this action log. So let's go take a look at the action log. So what I was doing while I was executing the test was I was recording all the mouse clicks so that I can play them back later. But what the action log does is it converts those mouse clicks to English text, actions, or localized text if you live in one of the 9 countries in the world in which we localize to. So you can see no longer you're getting WM mouse down type stuff, you're getting the actual actions that were performed. So putting your developer hat on for a second, now you're going to get a bug which has a screenshot, it has what the tester was supposed to be doing, the step, what the tester actually did in terms of the keys they pressed. I really understand what was going on, and I have timing hacks down the side, which is also pretty useful to me. If I go back to the bug one last time to see the last thing in here, if I click on this here, we were also capturing desktop video, which I'm pretty sure I have started Media Player before on this machine. So now you're actually going to be able to see the test case that I was performing. So now as a developer, you can see what I did, you see the mouse clicks that I performed, you saw what the system information was in terms of the system under test. This is a pretty decent bug. Not perfect by any means, but it's a pretty decent bug that I can stand a decent chance of fixing. Now, one of the things I don't have here is the debug log. Those people are familiar with IntelliTrace, which is the new historical debugger that we have in VS 2010. I could have attached that as well. I just didn't in this particular case to save time. So this is a pretty good bug. I have system information. I have all these things attached. It's automatically linked to the test case that found it, so I can trace it through the system, and I can see all those attachments. So we'll save and close this bug. And we'll go ahead and we'll shut the app down, and we will resume the test. And at this point in time, it's going to say end. And we'll save and close. So that was a relatively interesting bug from an exploratory test case. There's a bunch of useful information in there. Let me go into verify bugs. And the thing that I may want to do as a tester, however, is let's say I want somebody else to go take a look at that test case. I'm going on vacation. Somebody else needs to regress it. Somebody else needs to run it. Well, it's kind of hard for them to parse what I just did. Like I wandered around the app, in my case 3 minutes, could have been 20 minutes, could have been half an hour. So what I can do here is I can actually create a test case from the bug. So I can use all the information that I just created in the bug to actually reverse engineer a test case. And we can do this for any bug. So if I go through here, you can see all those actions that were being performed are now being turned into a test case. This is actually pretty useful stuff. Although there's some weird things in here where apparently I did tab and then shift tab. Well, I don't really want that, so let me edit this out. And then we'll edit out the shift tab as well. And we'll take out the spelling mistake. And then there's one more tab in here. And there we're, there's more than one tab in here. But you guys get the idea. I can also take these steps and I can share them with the server so that I can reuse steps. So I can then turn them into reusable components if I want for another speak as a developer. Okay, so we'll just call this live test case. So I now I started out with a single test case, which is a single line in it, which was to explore the app. I've generated a bug from it. And now I've gone ahead and created a real test case out of it that I can now use and then run on a regular basis. And I might choose to automate one day. So this is about raising the value of these bugs and raising the value of exploratory testing. All right, need to make sure I've got this done right. Okay, now let's go ahead and see if we can fix this bug. So there's something going wrong with the validation, obviously. So let's go ahead into our app. And the validation is all done in the Contact Manager service. So let's scroll down to Contact Manager service and look at the email validation. Well, one of the things that I'm doing here is I've missed out an @ sign in my validation string. So what I'm going to do is just add that in. Oh, good point. Good. Where was that, sir? Would you like a T-shirt? All right. Being British, I tend to kick the ball, but I'll give you a chance of catching it. I apologize to everybody. Okay, 4 rows back. That's pathetic even by my standards. Just be glad I didn't throw the microphone. One year at TechEd, I threw a football into the audience, and the microphone made it further than the football did. And being an American audience, I was somewhat scared about being sued. Didn't happen, luckily enough. All right. Oops, that's not what I meant to do at all. Okay, so I think I've got the formatting correct now. I've made this code change. I'm going to show you a new feature for developers in here. This has impacted tests. And one of the challenges is if you get into the unit testing space, you've now got hundreds or thousands of tests. Really, I have to go run them all because I missed out an @ sign? That sucks. Well, let's do a build and see what happens. If you look at the window on the right-hand side, as the build starts, magic should happen. You'll see right now there's only one impacted test. Now, magically, a whole bunch of tests appeared. What we do is, as we run tests, we track which parts of the code are called by those tests. Kind of sound like code coverage. But it means that when you then change the code, we know which tests are impacted by that code. So we can tell you which are the right tests to run first. This is not an exclusive list. Much as I would like to believe that our algorithm is perfect, it is not. It is used heavily at Microsoft inside the company. But this will give you an idea that if you only have time to run 5 or 6, these are the ones to go run. And if we can get you to run 5 or 6 instead of 500 or 600, that's a pretty good time saving. If you're a TDDer, you're going to run them all. If you're doing unit testing, this is a big time save. And you'll notice all I had to do was do the build. This also works server side. So if I have a bunch of people checking changes, I have 20 or 30 developers checking changes, as part of the build process, I can say run the tests first that the system recommends I run, and then run all the others later. Right? And so we can do this for developer tests like this, and manual tests, and automated tests, automated UI tests. What did I miss? Oh, crap. Sorry, give me your T-shirt back and tell me what it is. I'll come ask you at the end. Nobody tell him and take his laptop away from him so we can't find it on the internet. And his iPhone, and I mean his Windows Series 7 phone or whatever it is he's using. All right, so let's assume that I fixed the bug and deployed the application. What I want to do now is change hats again and switch back to being a tester. This is going to get really annoying by the time I'm done. And these hats are actually really hot with all these lights. I apologize for my sweatiness in advance. All right, so now I'm a tester, so what I want to do is go ahead and regress the bug. So let's assume that time had passed, and as a tester, I'd actually cleaned up that bug a little bit from the one that you saw. And here is you remember I kind of, oops, that's not what I meant to do. Remember I had turned the bug into a test case. It's a little bit more of a rich test case now. I've parameterized the data, so the group name is now parameterized and all sorts of stuff like that. So I say that we go ahead and we actually run this. And see, I've got this as data bound, so there's all the data for John down at the bottom. So let's go ahead and run this test as a data bound test. So we'll go here and we'll just do run again. Now, something new and exciting for you MIX attendees that we have not shown before, but which you can go download today yourselves, is up until now, for those of you who've seen this demo, we can only run in IE7 and IE8. Now, we can only record in IE7 and IE8, but all things being equal, I can play back in Firefox. Ha ha ha! And of course it was Visual Studio that decided to go and barf on me when I did that. I have no idea why Visual Studio did that. See, I'm a tester. What can I say? I find bugs where there are no bugs. That's my excuse and I'm sticking to it. All right, so I've said that I want... Oh, now I've broken everything. Okay, so let's see if this will actually work, given that we've had 2 crashes in a row. So now I have this test case. Now remember the example I talked about earlier. It's a manual test case. I haven't automated it. I just recorded my actions. If this was really some humongous forms over data line of business app where I had to fill in 30 or 40 fields, I want to be able to fill that in consistently, repeatedly. So what I'm going to show you is called fast forward for manual testing. I'm simply going to turn around and say, you know what, I don't care about all the steps that go in between. I just want to see if I can create. I want to test that create button call at the very end. So just go ahead and play it all back for me. And so off it goes. It's going to go ahead and it's going to launch Firefox, and it's just going to play back. This is not UI test automation, right? Because I'm not validating anything. I haven't added validators and used object inspectors and pickers and done all sorts of other cool stuff like that. I'm just playing it back to speed up my life as a manual tester. I'm also making my life more efficient because it's happening predictably, repeatably, and all that sort of good stuff. Okay, so now it stops at the end because if you notice here, there's a little tick box here. This means it's a validation step. I actually have to say pass or fail here. So you need a human sat at the keyboard while this is running, but it saved my life. You know, if this was 10 screens, this would have saved my life. You know, think about the shopping cart example. I want to buy 50 things from different parts. I want music, I want books, I want videos, I want toys, I want gadgets. Consistent, repeatable playback, right? So I'm going to pass this step in this particular case because it did actually work this time. I'm going to end the iteration because we're going to need this test case later. And we'll do save and close. Now, just to make my life a little easier, I'm going to delete this data because we're going to need this later on. So that's fast forward for manual testing. It's about making my testing a little bit more efficient. It's about making manual tests usable. So remember, my whole point was manual testing does not necessarily equal bad. The wrong type of manual testing done the wrong way, sure. But efficient manual testing that makes use of the right resources and everything else like that, not necessarily such a bad thing. All right, let's go back to the slides, and I can get rid of this stupid hat for a little while. I really wasn't thinking when I brought 2 furry hats. Luckily, I have the hairstyle that makes no difference whether I'm sweating or not. So we did exploratory testing. We took an exploratory bug. We filed with an exploratory test case. We filed a bug from it. We turned it back into a test case. We looked at a real manual test case that was data-bound and had steps and validation and cool stuff like that. And then we did fast forward for manual testing. You guys got to be the first people to see the Firefox thing live. Now, we only support Firefox right now. We're not going to do Opera. We're not going to do Safari. But you guys can. It's an open API. You can plug it in. It's relatively straightforward to do. The recorder is the hard part. And for now, we'll stick with recording in IE7 and IE8 until you guys turn around and say, we absolutely demand recording in Firefox, in which case we'll go ahead and do it. All right. So let's move on. So we've got our manual tests. We've done our developer unit tests. We've got our manual tests. Functional tests. Well, this is relatively straightforward. Right? This is a relatively well-known thing in our industry. UI functional testing on the .NET platform. Selenium is a pretty popular tool. Waton's a pretty popular tool as well. We know lots of people using those. There's a bunch of other tools out there. NUnit Forms was it for a while, but kind of died off. Project White on Codeplex. If you like writing code, Project White's an interesting technology. But we have a solution in VS 2010 that I'm going to show you as well. One thing I want to talk about, though, is when you think about automation, the UI should be the last place you automate. Unit testing, component level testing, because it's the most dependent, reliable. Service level testing, that's what MVC is all about, and MVP and MVVM and MV who knows what in 5 years' time. Then the UI is the last year. This triangle is not done as a triangle just because I like the pretty graphics in PowerPoint. This is about where your weight of energy and effort should be. Your UI automated testing should be scenario-based tests. It should be the end-to-end stuff. It shouldn't be the basic functional things. So for example, I actually have unit tests in that Contact Manager app that test valid and invalid input, which are the tests that popped up as soon as I changed the validation routine from test impact analysis. That's the right thing to do to test that logic, but I also have to test that the front end is getting the data through to the validation service correctly. So that's really what I'm testing by automating that particular piece of functionality. So really think about this pyramid and focus on putting your energy in the right place. All right. Oh, nuts. That means I have to go back and... Okay, so here's the next fun question. Which hat do I wear? I'm going to write code. Our UI test solution for VS 2010 is all done through code. Well, there's a type of tester who writes code. We call them the specialist tester. A lot of people in our .NET world, in the Microsoft world, are going to be developers who write this code to begin with, though. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to wear the big cowboy hat for this session, I think. All right, let's switch back to the demo machine. Let's leave MTM up and running, and we'll see if Visual Studio stays up long enough. Let's create a new project. And I'm going to create a new test project in this particular case. So test C#, and we'll just call this live demo. Because I am way behind on my timing. Faster, you, and faster. Those of you, by the way, who have not used VS 2010, you'll notice nothing got added to the test project. Nice, simple, clean, lightweight test project. Not extra files to tell you how to test and things like that. So let's go ahead and we're going to add a new coded UI test. And it gives me two choices. How do you want to, I can say cancel, so technically it's 3. How do you want to generate your test? In this particular case, I'm going to use an existing action recording. What I want to do is take that manual tests case that you just saw me using fast forward with. I'm going to select it from the list of test cases, my test cases, and you'll see the little cross signs here indicate there's no automation for this. These 3 all have automation against them. I'm going to pick one, I'm going to generate code from it. So rather than starting from scratch as the guy writing the automation, I'm going to use the manual test case as the basis. Because guess what? I'm probably going to manual test first to prove the app before I invest in automation. Right? Because there's no point in writing automation if the app's changing all the time. So the app has proved to be productive and it works. Nice thing here, for those of you who understand the attributes in VS, is because I had parameters and data binding in that test, it's automatically picked that up and data bound this test for me. I don't have to have this test be data bound, but in this particular case it is. And the connection string is actually to the test case, not to an Excel file or anything else like that. So that data I typed in MTM, it's actually attached to that. And just to prove that that's the case, remember when we ran this test case, we ran it with 1 row of data, right? So let's go ahead and add another row of data into this test case. So Guthrie's name, right? And Scott gets a special phone number. And we'll say Scott's a VP friend because he's special. So what's going to happen here is we should see an extra group being created, Scott being added to the extra group, and John being added to his group. Okay, so I'm just going to save and close that test case. All right, so remember, when I generated this code, there was only 1 row. I just generated the code. Now I've added a second row. I'm just going to go ahead and run this test just like I would do any other test. Control-RT, run test in context, and it's going to go ahead and launch the automation. So this automation engine, people are going to say, okay, interesting, Microsoft has one of these things, but these things are really hard to write. Correct. So it's going to be kind of flaky in V1. Somewhat correct. The engine that we're using here has been used in Microsoft for almost 10 years now. It's used by the Windows team, the SQL team, the Visual Studio team, and a bunch of other teams. So the engine is actually pretty robust. What's new is the recorder and then the API that sits above it, which, let's just say our API, the internal one's a little on the rough and ready side, and we tried to make it a little friendlier for all of you to actually go ahead and be able to manipulate this. So you just program it. The code, I don't know if you saw it, was just C# code. I can do it in VB.NET as well. So it's just C#, VB code, and I'm automating UI. I'm not going to delve into the depths of the code that's actually generated here. So here you see it running the second time, by the way. So I'm not going to delve into the depths of the code that's generated. We've got lots of information on the web. My email address is at the beginning of the slides. I'll point you at it if you want to explain how it works and how to be able to mess around with it. Now, the one thing that's missing here is I'm still doing essentially fast forward. I've not done any data validation at any point so far, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. All right, and if we go into the test results window, test pass is by default test pass. So let's go ahead and just pop up this app, and let's just very quickly show you how you would do validation, but I'm not going to do the validation itself. I'll do that in the next thing. So now I've got the playback working. I want to go and validate something. So I'm going to launch the little builder thing, and you'll see this little toolbar appears down the bottom here, and I'm going to use the sniper scope, which I'm not allowed to call a sniper scope in public because it doesn't pass the geopolitical test, but the thing that looks like a sniper scope. And I can now select controls. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select Scott Guthrie's name, What it does is it then says, okay, that's a control, and here's the type, and now here's all the properties on that that I can use for data validation purposes. In this case, we'll use inner text. We'll add an assertion. It's equal to. You can see there's a range of assertions built in. Say OK. We'll go ahead. We'll generate code. Take the default name is fine. And then we'll shut it down. And so now what's going to happen is it's going to go ahead and run through, and then it's going to call this assert method. If I do an F12 on here, you'll see that it's going to do an assert r equal. And all it's going to do here is, if we take a look at this particular piece of code, it's going to look at the control, which is the UI Scott Guthrie cell, inner text, and it's going to compare it to the inner text of the actual control. So there's an expected values, which is just parameters. So I can do multiple asserts. This is not like unit testing. In unit testing, the rule is you only assert one thing at a time. In the UI, I could assert colors, sizes, data rows, all sorts of stuff like that. We have some helper libraries available to allow you to do things like, hey, there needs to be 5 things in this list. Well, you just give it a reference to the list, and it'll validate 5 things for you. All right, so it's very, very powerful, but very simple mechanism. If you know how to write unit tests, then in reality, you know how to write coded UI tests. One quick thing, let me just go ahead and go back to the coded UI test just to prove something. Let me just comment this out. So this obviously ran inside of IE. So what do we need to do to go ahead and get this to run inside Firefox? How easy is it to do that? So browser window, except if I spell it correctly, browser window dot current browser equals Firefox. I won't run it, but you'll have to believe me, it's true. It's that easy. If you guys write an Opera plugin, that's how you get to run an Opera. And to flip it back again, you just set it back to IE7, IE8 is the value. So you can actually have the same test run multiple times and change the browser depending on how you're looping over the test and things like that. All right, let me go back into the application because I need to clean out the data a little bit. So let's delete Mr. Galloway again. And then we will, cardinal sin, we'll delete Scott Guthrie from the world. And then we'll kill VP friends, and we'll kill event friends. How are we doing? All right, so we're running way over time, but I have a couple of quick things to show. So let me go ahead and show you something cool called visual verification very quickly. I'm going to open up a new tool, WPF demo. Now, one of the things here is that the assert model doesn't always work. What happens if you're doing something cool with bitmaps or maps or tiles? What on earth is it you're actually going to go ahead and assert in that particular case? Well, sometimes you just need to be able to do plain old bitmap comparison, quite frankly. Don't do it as your default answer, because it's flaky. But if you're actually looking at comparing, hey, I expect to see a map of Las Vegas, and you get a map of Seattle, you want to be able to detect that automatically. So here is an app that will run very quickly, which shows you how to do just that. So this is going to launch the application just using UI test automation like I showed you. Then I'm going to use the visual verification framework, which you can download freely from Codeplex. And it's going to take a snapshot here, and it's going to take a snapshot from window, and then it's going to take the main window handle. So I'm going to navigate to a place in the application, take a snapshot, then I'm going to compare that snapshot. Well, here I have something called a tolerance map. I'll explain that in a second. And then here, it's going to compare it against the master, which is the expected result. So take snapshot from the screen, having navigated to the right place in the application, compare it with something in the file system. Here, it's going to compare the two. And then here, it's actually going to go ahead and write out what it found. The expected result, what it actually found, and the difference between the two. And then it's going to compare the two using a verifier. Now, there are multiple types of verifier. I'm using a snapshot verifier here. I could use a histogram. I can use a color wheel, so I can compare the color depths and things like that. So let me actually just change this app. So I was going to show you it passing and then show it failing. I'm going to show it to you failing first. I need to quickly launch another copy of Visual Studio. Let's go, and we need to launch the actual application under test, which is this one. So it's a very simple WPF app. It just loads a bitmap onto the screen and shows it. Let's go for the advanced option, I think. So with controls. So I have a screen here, which is this with controls. What this is a bitmap with a bunch of controls on it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, I want you to compare the two bitmaps, but I want you to ignore the region that has the controls in it. Right? So I'm going to use a mask which says mask out this section of the UI, because the controls could move, they could change style and stuff like that. So I could use a raw bitmap comparison, but you'll see. So if you look over here on the right-hand side, the picture looks beautiful, doesn't it? It's perfect lines. If I go ahead and change the picture to one which has a flaw in it, let's do this, and then I want properties, and we'll change it. So that's Desert Original, and we'll do Desert Messed With, because I couldn't think of anything better. If you look very carefully, there's a flaw now. What I did is I took a slice and just moved it and offset it slightly. But it's kind of subtle, right? Your eye would have to look to be able to actually spot that. So let's go ahead and we'll just build this application. So we have the right version dropped in the share. So we built it with that in it. Let's go back into Visual Studio, and we'll go into the verifier app. And the first test method was doing picture to picture. This one is going to look at this tolerance, and I will show you what the tolerance means in a second. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. So what you should see is the application will start up. It's then going to get a reference to the window handle. It's going to take a screenshot. Yep, it is the one with the line. And it's going to compare the two. And what it's going to turn around and say is, hey, the two are different where the controls are and where the image is different. But because I'm using a mask to say ignore the controls, it's going to say, actually, it's fine. So if we go into the test results, we'll see it failed, which is what I would have expected because of the difference in the bitmaps. So if we go ahead here, here's the actual. So that's what it actually took a screenshot of. You can see the offset here on the controls. If I go in here and take a look at the difference, here's what it found was different. It saw where I sliced the image, but it also saw the controls. Now, in this particular case, it failed the test because of the difference in the bottom right-hand corner. Because if I go in here and show you the tolerance map, I said, the way the tolerance map works is black means pay attention. White means completely ignore this section. And then using different shades of gray between those two boundaries will change the tolerance level of the comparison. So I could, if I'd wanted to, made this mid-gray and it would probably still have worked. Okay, so a bunch of people are looking like they're still recovering from LAX last night. So take a screenshot of the actual. I have a mask which says ignore where the controls are, but anywhere else the two bitmaps don't equal each other, that's a failure. So in this particular case, that's exactly what happened. The test case failed, which is what I expected, because of this difference over on the right-hand side, not because of the controls being in place. So if we go back to the difference map, it was the right-hand side that caused the failure, not the controls because of the mask. Okay, making sense, or as much sense as it's going to make St. Paddy's Day, last day of the conference. All right. Switch back to the slides. See how quickly I can do the last 9 minutes. Only about 50 minutes of content to go. This is the supported matrix for UI test automation. The important thing here is HTML, Ajax, I didn't show it, but you can do drag and drop in Ajax and right-click. All that stuff works. Record only in IE 7 and 8. In terms of the desktop, WinForms, WPF, SharePoint 2007 fully supported. Win32 MFC, we have some issues which we'll document as known issues. Stuff that's going to get better, Firefox, that's a beta of the Firefox driver. You saw it today. Silverlight, terminal services, and the Office client apps, we still have work to do. The red area, we got nothing. And we have no intention of doing anything. If we're telling everybody not to use IE6 anymore anyway, so that one's kind of a safe one. The other browsers, you can write your own plugins for those. Flash Java, we're actually working with a partner there, and the same with SAP. And I've just forgotten, I forgot probably the most important demo of the entire day. So let me switch back to the other machine to do the other important demo, because there are 3 devs who will be up very, very late, who will shoot me if I don't do this demo. So let's go ahead and start a new project in Visual Studio. Another new test project, and this is fine. Let's just do this SL demo. Again, this is a first for Mix. I'm going to create a new coded UI test again. This time, I'm going to generate the code a different way. So remember, last time I did it by using an existing. I'm going to record the actions live this time. Shut down some of these extraneous windows, like this extra copy of Visual Studio I have, and this directory, and even this. All right, so now it's saying, hey, go ahead and record the thing you want to record. So let's record. The recording is now active. Let's now pause it, because I forgot to shut down Internet Explorer. Let's close Internet Explorer. Okay, start recording. Start Internet Explorer. Maximize it. You can see the current recording thing up in the top right-hand corner. I'm going to connect to the Employee Management app this time. Now, the Employee Management app is the same idea as the Contact Management app, except it's significantly cooler. It's significantly cooler in the case of employee management because it's written in Silverlight. So this is a Silverlight application. So I'm going to add myself as a new employee to the company. You can see the events being captured in the bottom right-hand corner as I'm typing. 21, there we go. Obviously, I'm dreaming a little bit today. Maybe St. Paddy's Day started early for me as well as for you guys. And we'll go ahead and we'll add the employee. So it's added me to the left-hand side. It's using isolated storage here. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually just going to pause the recording because I don't want to record what I'm going to do next. I'm going to generate code. Start up the app, add and generate. Okay, now what I want to do is take this, and I'm going to generate an assert, and we'll put it over this control. And just to prove that there's no smoke and mirrors here, if I expand this out, you'll see the technology in here is actually Silverlight. And we're just going to use the name of the control in this particular case. This is very much work in progress. I got these bits 3 days ago, so this is not something you have access to yet, but you will do over the summertime. We'll say it's equal to you in Garden. Yep, that's fine. We'll go ahead and generate code. Yeah, that's fine. We'll take all the default names. All right, so we'll close that down. We'll just pop in the browser. We'll just delete that record by hand. Turn around. Okay, so now we're going to start the application, then we're going to insert. Remember, this is Silverlight. It's the first time we've shown this running live. Now, the nice thing here is I won't have time to walk through the code with you, but if you could see the code, looks just like the code that I did for the HTML, which looks just like the code for WinForms, which looks just like the code for WPF. The way our platform works, and one of the reasons that we work so hard at it is, it's the same infrastructure. Web, Ajax, HTML, Silverlight, Firefox, WPF, WinForms, Win32, it doesn't matter. It's the same test type. You just flip these technology providers around, and life is good for both the recorder and the playback. It's a little slow. I'll give the guys a fighting chance. Literally, I asked them a month ago, I said, hey, could you give me a Silverlight demo for Mix? There was a loud cackling noise at that point in time, but they managed to pull it off. And so if we go in here and take a look at the test results, it passed. The assert passed in this particular case. So I think you guys did an amazing job. You're the first people to see it. Expect a beta of this that you can actually go ahead and use in the summertime of the Silverlight support. Thank you. All right, let's fly through the last stuff. Okay, I did all this. Performance and load testing and security testing. Well, we should be doing performance and load testing. I had an interesting conversation with the customer. Get rid of my hat. This is really starting to annoy me. I had an interesting conversation with the customer a couple of weeks ago, and he says, I don't need to do performance or load testing anymore because I'm using Azure. I'm like, that's awesome news, especially as a shareholder of Microsoft. And he goes, why? I said, well, why do you do performance testing today and load testing today? Well, because I need to know how much hardware to buy, and I need to make the app more efficient, so I buy less hardware. And I said, yeah, okay. So what's your app going to use in Azure? Well, we need 4 medium-sized instances. He's like, what happens if your developers wrote crappy code so you need 10 extra larges? How much extra is that going to cost you? And you just saw this kind of veil lift up over his face as he went, damn, that's going to get expensive. Thank you for that advice. Now, how much is that again for your load testing tool? The world changes, but the world doesn't change. Right? The reason that we do load and performance testing is to make sure we stay up, our apps stay up, our websites stay up. But in the case of Azure, you're assuming it's going to scale for free on demand. But your bill could get really, really spendy. MD ever taken an AT&T phone to Europe and forgotten to ask for an international data plan? I went from $90 a month to $700 for 2 weeks in Europe. So this doesn't go away as the landscape changes. Security testing. This is a bug that was found for real by one of the testers in our team when he was on vacation. Anybody spot the parameter flaw on the URL here? Okay. I'll give it a more obvious. Fee equals $8.95. Damn sight cheaper than the Mandalay Bay for their internet connection, but $8.95. So being a tester, guess what he did? He put 0 in. Guess what? Didn't pay for his internet connection that night. So, because he looked at his bill on the television. You know what he did the next night? Minus 100. Guess what? William Shatner's right. You can get a great deal on a hotel if you look really carefully. So, security testing, it's not just about penetration. It's about stupidity in some cases, and just taking a look at things from an obvious perspective. What automated tools would have caught this, but I'm surprised some manual person who was still awake and wasn't hungover from St. Paddy's Day didn't spot this particular one, and as a tester start messing with these numbers. The 0 I thought was impressive. The minus 100 was a very, very dirty, filthy trick in my mind, and a very impressive piece of work on his part. All right, one more demo, and then we're out of here, and you guys can all head to the bar. So let me go open up a thing here. So I'm going to show you, I was going to show you this live, but I've got a pre-done one which will save time. Show you a load test. So what I did earlier was adding a new contact. I recorded that using an HTTP recorder, not using a UI recorder. So I recorded all the HTTP requests going between the client and the server, including all the AJAX updates. And so I recorded add a contact and add a group. And here you can see a split. So 95% of my workload is going to be adding contacts, because I think that's what people will do. 5% will be adding new groups. I'm just going to test an IE. We'll assume it's a LAN. I'm going to run what's called a step load pattern. I'm going to start with 5 users and keep adding users until the system breaks. So let's go ahead and run this. This is going to launch, and I'll explain what you're seeing once it actually launches. So those diagnostic things that I was talking about earlier, like desktop video recording, the diagnostic debugger log and teletrace, we also have integration with the profiler. So I'm running with the profiler on in the background here, because the first thing that happens when you hit a performance problem is you want to go ahead and take a look and see what was happening in the code when you see the nasty spike in the graph. So from that perspective, wouldn't it be nice if the profiler was built in? So that's a new feature of 2010. Reaching through from the actual test into the diagnostics is a theme. Whether the diagnostics are a video, the action log, a debugger log, or the profiler that I talked about earlier. So here you can see the top left-hand window, key indicators. The red line is the one that's interesting. That's the number of users ramping up. The bottom right-hand box is the one that I have rigged to show something interesting. Green line is memory utilization. So memory utilization, good. We're increasing users, but memory utilization is not going up. Red line, CPU utilization. Not so good. Big spikes in CPU utilization without a significant ramp in the number of users. And in fact, if you look here, you can see these are little yellow exclamation marks. That means I'm hitting thresholds as I'm doing the load testing. In this particular case, I've set 80% as a threshold to warn, and I don't remember if it's 85 or 90 I've set to mark it as an error. So I'm going to go ahead and run this test for 3 minutes. I'll flip back to the slides while it's running. But you can see in the top left-hand corner here that we have threshold violations which are occurring, and the load is continuing to ramp up. We're seeing errors. We're seeing some test response time erratic behavior in terms of page load behavior, and then the same is true of the page response time in the top right. Okay, now life starts to get interesting. We've got a red cross on the CPU, which means we basically pegged the CPU. This is the quad core, by the way. We're driving 250 user simulated load from on the quad core virtualized machine. The graph's having to rescale itself now because the page loads are getting so low. So very easily, for a very simple app, I was able to just record those HTTP requests and now scale to 250 virtual users. I could have scaled this out across multiple machines. We have groups at Microsoft who simulate hundreds of thousands and actually in the millions of users using this tooling to be able to emulate different behaviors. So the most interesting guys are the media room guys, the guys who build the server that your cable box connects to. They need to be able to simulate millions of people trying to download a video at the same time. So they use this technology to go ahead and test it. So you can see that we're actually really in trouble in the top right-hand corner in terms of our performance. So our performance is really kind of dropping off at this point in time. We have 24 seconds to go, so I'm just going to let this finish out. And I'm over time by a couple of minutes, but you guys have got nothing better to go to than the bar. There's literally 2 minutes left once I finish this thing, so just give me time. And I have free T-shirts to give away. And a book as well. And my alarm's buzzing to tell me I'm over time. Thank you. All right, so now we're finished. Just going to write all the results away to a database, because the thing I really want to do here is not sit and look at these little charty things, which are cool. I want to go ahead and take a look and see how this compares to the last time I tested it. Because the performance is all about against something else. So what I would have done here is I would have taken a baseline, made the change that I just made, which is actually what I did. I took a baseline, make the change, and then go ahead and rerun the test, and then compare the two. So I'm just going to launch Excel here. I'm going to compare 2 runs. We'll call this live demo. And it's that load test I just did. And we'll take the one we just did versus the baseline that I did last night at 6 o'clock in the morning, and we'll say, just give me data. And I'm doing this basically because I always enjoy watching UI automation at work in Office. I could sit here and watch it for hours. Okay, so we compared 2 test runs, and instantly we can see. Blue is the baseline, red is what we just did. So we're slower Instantly we can see we're slower for both adding a contact and adding a group, and we can see the percentage data down at the bottom. I can see page level comparisons, again, against the baseline run. You can see here, in some places we're in really bad shape, like negative 300%, not good. And if we take a look over here, much as I like looking at rainbows, there's a little too much orange, yellow, and red on this for me. So in this case, I would probably go back out the change that I just made and try and work out how on earth adding an @ symbol into the code managed to make such a terrible performance regression. But I did something else in the code behind the scenes to make this happen. But you get the idea. The key here to the performance work is baseline and then compare when you make changes. Because just making random changes saying, I'm going to change this algorithm to use a different hash table, how do you know if you got better or worse? Right? The CPU cycle time might get better, but maybe you use more memory. You need to be able to look at the problem holistically. What about the cloud? Last content slide. So here's a thought on the cloud. This is a relatively simplistic, modern mashup style app. I don't even have Twitter and Facebook in here. In the old days, I'd test the auctioncloud.com website, and I would do UI testing against it, and maybe I'd pull the network cable out from behind my server and see how I reacted to errors. Now what do? I need to be able to work out how Auction Cloud is going to respond if the network cable between the Zillow.com service and the MLS public service goes down. How does Zillow respond, and then how do I respond? So the nice thing about auctioncloud.com here is I could test it using all the UI testing that I was just doing. I could do some load testing, load balancers and everything else like that. The thing that's unique about these mashup and cloud experiences is look at the edges. Look at the edges of the system where you're no longer in control. What happens when that breaks? How does that perform? What's the SLA you're getting? How are you verifying the SLA you're paying for from whoever your cloud service provider is to make sure that your app is the one that doesn't get the blame in this particular case? A classic example of how the cloud changes things. Don't know about you guys, but setup, and I'm looking at Nico here, setup is the guys who always get the short end of the stick when building packaged software. Setup gets done at the end, it gets tested at the end, everybody's always jamming new files in at the last minute. Most setups of most applications are held together with baling wire and twine. But if you rely on your setup, which is deployment in the cloud sense, as the way that your app scales, it's the fundamental unit of scale is redeploying the app to another node or to another 100 nodes, damn, you better test deployment first and the best, because if that goes down, you lose response time, you lose functionality, you lose scalability, and you lose your business. So the cloud really turns some stuff on its head from that perspective. And I think in reality, testing in production, the whole beta tag for years thing, and a lot of the things I've talked about here, we're only just starting to discover what some of these challenges are. So my final thoughts for you before I come give away t-shirts for interesting questions and stuff like that. Pay attention to the details. The 895 thing on the command line. Care about quality, because we're all consumers of each other's software. How frustrated do you get when something you use sucks? Think about your users. Will they come back to your site? Will they buy your software again? If we don't care about quality, then who in our industry is actually going to go ahead and care about quality? Some interesting books for you to go ahead and read. The top 3 are product agnostic. Agile testing is really interesting. How to Break Web Software was written by the guy who hacked the website that I showed you. How we test software at Microsoft. I have a copy to give away here for somebody who's interested. The bottom left-hand book is all about the tools I just showed you, and testing ASP.NET web applications. Actually talks about using NUnit and Selenium and Watton and a bunch of open source stuff. It's actually a really good book. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much for your time. If you have questions, please step up to the microphone. Otherwise, enjoy whatever time you have left in Vegas. Free t-shirts for interesting questions. Sir, go ahead. Can we switch the microphone on, please? You know what, sir? Just shout and I will repeat.
I don't know if this is a question, but your slide containing about the mobile Windows phone.
What a great question. Here we go. Have a free t-shirt. So the question was, my slides didn't say anything about mobile platform. Right now, we don't have a good answer on the mobile platform. We need to kind of get Silverlight on the desktop taken care of. The nice thing is that Silverlight is relatively similar across the platforms, so we hope we can do some work there. Jeff Wilcox, who sat at the back, actually showed yesterday how to use the unit test framework for the desktop Silverlight against the phone, so we're hoping we can pick some of that up. The other thing that's interesting is XNA, which is the platform that the gaming stuff is written on. That visual verification API I was using, that's from the WPF and X and A teams. Sometimes with games, you can't test the way you test a business app. You test by doing differential bitmap comparison and using histograms and things like that. And so that's another strategy out there. So the short answer is nothing right now. Once we get Firefox and Silverlight out the door, then watch the space for more announcements about support for mobile. So that was a great question. Other questions from anybody else? Come, you've got one. Good question. So the question is what happens when buttons move around and refactoring tests. So there's a couple of things. First of all, the way coded UI works is moving the position of a control won't break it, as long as you didn't identify the control by its position. So by default, we never find a control by its position. We use a name or containership or something like that. So if you move something around like that, it's fine. If you move it to another page, that is going to be more difficult for us to be resilient to. The nice thing about what we do is we just generate code. It's just C# code or VB code. So if you don't like the way our code's laid out, just go ahead and refactor it yourself. The way we generate the code is a partial class. And so what you can do is move some of your specific logic into the other half of the partial class that's not auto-generated. And that's one way to deal with it. If you mess with the generated code, there's no round tripping in this release. Once you mess with it, you're kind of stuck with it. What I have seen some people do internally at Microsoft is forward generate the code, then take a snap of it, and then when changes occur, they use the recorder to generate new snippets of code, which they add to the library they have already built. We actually have a bunch of testers at Microsoft who handwrite that stuff. And if you've ever looked at the code that Coded UI generates, they are braver men than me, that's all I can say. If you want further advice, send me an email. The email alias is there, and I'll put you in touch with the PM for Coded UI, and you can talk about the specific challenges, because we do have some best practices and patterns around how to deal with that. Question?
What about, like a lot of things you say that they have the same name for control. That's what you look for, but often it's not actually like in a civil UI operation, and it's like more like a gesture you want to execute the code. Like how do you work with gestures and drags?
Another great one. So how do we work with gestures and drags? So those are actually relatively simple because once the gestures and drags are sourced and targeted, right? It's the old drag drop events from Windows 3.0 date, right? What's the source? What was the destination? Finding the controls is the hard part. Playing back the rest is actually just a question of calling into the Windows APIs. So we don't have gesture support right now, so we don't do the Win7 gestures. We will get to it. But drag drop, I have a level 400 version of this session where I literally sit and add things to list and drag things around and do stuff like that. And the recording all works fine. And if you want to write it by hand in code, you can do as well. So with the exception of the kind of the edgier touch stuff, all standard Windows stuff works just fine, and we'll pick up support for the touch stuff later on. Other questions? Okay, you don't get anything free, though. I seem to be, did I give away a shirt already? That someone stole one.
So if you're targeting specific hardware, does your recorder or your playback just kind of play it back on a different device and then capture the results? I may not want to install the entire platform in 2010 on the device I'm deploying to, right?
So great question. I don't want to install 2010 on the device I'm deploying to. So the nice thing again about the solution is it's just code. So what happens is it just becomes an assembly which is compiled. And remember how I talked about our agent will run distributed. I can load it across multiple machines to generate load. So we have a free agent, sorry, free is not the right word, licensed as additional software agent that if you buy a piece of software from us, you can deploy it on a bunch of machines and it will only emulate one user. The free one will only emulate one user. But the classic example is build, right? I want to be able to build and then run some sort of UI check-in test to make sure nobody screwed up. Well, I don't want full Visual Studio installed on the build server. So it's just a DLL. It just gets run just like a unit test does in that particular case. If you want to run it on a different machine, you can do. It's actually just run from the MS Test command line, just the same way as a unit test would be run. Now, there's extra binaries which you need to deploy, and the easiest way to get those binaries on the machine is just install the agent SKU, which as long as you buy a licensed version of the product, you can deploy that. You can only emulate one user, though. If you want to do the virtual user, 1,000 user thing, those you need to pay for. Other questions? Yep, and you get a book. Nico, can you throw us back to him? So the ability for Visual Studio 2010 to connect to an Azure application and test it. So as long as the front end of your Azure app is Silverlight or HTML, Everything I showed you today just works. The place where we fall down today is diagnostics, because we can't deploy a diagnostics agent into the cloud to capture debug information and things like that, event logs. That's something that we're looking at, is the ability to deploy our agents into Azure so that you could both use Azure to generate load, but also to capture diagnostics. Right now, the Azure Diagnostics story is pretty much, trace log debugging type stuff. So we're doing some work on the diagnostics side with them to step that up a bit. Then we can wrap that diagnostics engine that they'll produce in something that we can call into. But in terms of pure UI test automation, you're good to go. Unit testing, we're working with the Azure team to support unit testing against Azure-based library projects, if you will, going forwards. So Azure and mobile are the next ones after this. Do you have any plans for releasing what? So not firm plans that we're willing to talk about. Nice try, though. Other questions? Really? Yes. Here, you get a voucher to get a free ebook, because I'm out of other free stuff.
I'll ask a dumb question.
There's no such thing as a dumb question, only dumb answers in my case.
How do you compare Selenium's capabilities what you showed in the functional design testing?
How would I compare Selenium? That's a great question. So I think Selenium's cross-browser stuff is better. They've been doing it longer than we have. I think there are nicer things about our API in terms of the way it works. I think Selenium has a whole community built around it that's been around for a long time. And also Selenium is Google's de facto tool. I think the author works for Google now, if I remember correctly, or one of the original authors works for Google. So it's, it's pseudo-supported by one of the big boys. I think we'll get caught up very quickly. I think a lot of people are very excited about Coded UI. We have a lot of our MVPs who are really jazzed about it and are like, hey, can I write a widget that does this? Can I write a widget that does that? So I think we'll move very, very quickly. And quite frankly, you guys, the .NET community, are amazingly creative in terms of the things that you come up with. So I think we could have a very interesting conversation 1 year from now in comparing Selenium versus Coded UI and where they are versus where we are. Other questions? I still have more vouchers to give away. Yes, sir. So does the test client connect to TFS Basic? You know what? That's a good question. I don't remember. It should do, but the reality is there's no, the difference between TFS Basic and Standard is just the stuff that gets installed and enabled. But send me mail to my email address, which was, you got address. Send me mail, because I want to say it'll work just fine, but I don't want to mislead you. So go ahead and just send me mail and I'll get you the right answer. Pretty sure it works. Other questions? Two more. There must be two more questions. Either that, you're all such nerds, you're all tweeting about how much the session sucked and you didn't get anything free. There are bars to go to, people. All right? You don't count. Come on, Jeff.
Which bar will it be at?
Which bar will I be at? The closest one, given this particular event. Nobody for any more? Yes. Everything's manual in your world. You would not be the only person to be in that situation.
Where do you think, what aspect should, I know you said,
Where should you start? It's a tough question. So one of the things I've worked with a couple of companies to do, honestly, is actually to use the test manager tool that I showed you with their UAT testers. Right, so they have lots of manual testing, but their UAT testers kind of do sign-off testing. It's a relatively small investment in terms of dollar figure. The SKU is less than $2,000 depending on the license agreement you have access to. As long as you already have TFS deployed in your organization, you don't need to deploy a server. It just works. Have the UAT testers use it because they do very repetitive work, and they're not professional testers in some cases, so they tend to screw up more often. So that's something I would look at doing. And I would look at seeing if you have, I didn't show it, I'll quickly show it now, but if you have an app that works like, say, Sugar CRM does, which just has insane amounts of data entry, go ahead and try and automate that because it's so error-prone. Where's my Sugar example? Here's my Sugar example here. It's so error-prone and it's so costly to get it wrong that you really want to try and make your tests predictable and get some return on investment. So this is going to run slowly because I have a performance problem with my SQL on this machine that I'm not sure what's causing it. But if you let this run for a second in the background, you'll see what I mean. Like, this is the default Sugar CRM installation. To add a new contact, 20 fields. To add a new account, 25 fields, and stuff like that. That's the stuff that, quite frankly, if I was a manual tester, I would screw up every single day of my life. And the question is, if you type the wrong data in and then you just hit the backspace key a few times, did you just invalidate your test case? Because the next time you run it, if you type it correctly and you don't backspace, it's actually a different test case. Oh, your head's going to explode in that particular case. So, I mean, take a look at this. This is the default. I did not customize this implementation at all. Look at how much data needs typed in here. And there's this problem with the page refresh. This is actually going to fail in a second. So that's a place I would start. Look for those easy wins. And one of the things I didn't show you in the runner is I did play all. You can do 5 steps manually and then play back the data entry steps, and then do 5 steps manually, and then play back the data entry steps. You can happily mix and match manual and automated testing from that perspective. That's why it's called fast forward for manual testing. It's not automated. And so here's a nice thing. If the playback fails, normally this test case would fail. Right? But in this case, I know what happened. It can't find this particular control for some reason. So I'm going to fix it manually, and then just say skip and continue, and it's going to continue working. Right? So even as a manual tester, that's kind of cool. If the playback doesn't work, because UI automated testing is fundamentally flawed in the way we work, which is why there's such a bad reputation in the industry, that's not that expensive. I still need a human to be sat here, but this thing types 4 times faster than most humans type, and it's repeatable, predictable every single time. Long answer to a short question, but it's kind of the crux of why we think this tool is very valuable and why we talk about raising the value of manual testing. If you do manual testing with a tool like this, with the integrated diagnostics, when you go ahead and file bugs, that's actually kind of cool. Right? There's value in that. It's repeatable, it's consistent, it's faster, it's more efficient. The testers are actually working with the developers, not against them. And so that's something I would do. So this one, in this particular case, it can't find the home page. So if I go over here and then click on this home, like this, and then go back and do skip and continue, it'll continue quite happily along. This is a 77-step test case. There's 2 that it couldn't play back for whatever reason, but all the others it can play back just fine, and it's going to do them correctly every single time. I have one more to give away. Sir, nice timing, yes?
How much level of detail would you get from the UI?
That's not bad for a piece of paper.
Could you get stack trace information, exception handling?
Yeah. So the question is, what sort of information do I get? In short, pretty much everything you could possibly want. One of the nice things is that data, this is going to die now. The data collector interface, let me just create a contact so you can see how many fields that takes. The data collector interface, which is what I'm calling into to get video and diagnostics, 15 lines of code to write your own. So like the minimalistic one that does hello world is 15 lines of C# code. So if there's a piece of diagnostics that's important in your app, you can write your own. Now, we have a bunch that we're going to ship out of band. I actually think one of the coolest ones is a PowerShell one. And so you saw me gather system information. I guarantee you that whatever property you want of the machine, we didn't get it. And getting all that system information is actually pretty expensive because we're using WMI. So we didn't want to get like 200 properties of the machine because it slows everything down. So we got the basic set, and then what we'll do is ship a PowerShell collector, and then all that you do is you just get an event that says, hey, I'm starting a test. Did you want to run any code? Hey, I'm stopping a test. Did you want to run any code? Hey, I passed a step. I failed a step. Because if you think about it, the collectors behave differently depending on pass-fail. So the IntelliTrace, which is the diagnostics debugger thing, we only capture that log if a failure occurs. Because the log files are huge. They're 2 gig. You don't want to be filling up your server with those if your test cases are passing. But in the case of a code coverage test, I only want to capture that if the test case passes. I capture the code coverage data at that point in time. So the collectors can behave differently depending on the circumstances. And they don't just have to collect data. One of the ones we have in prototype, which we'll release out of band, consumes memory on the machine. You basically turn around and say, hey, I want you to use 75% of available memory at startup. So you'll see how your app runs under a constrained memory situation. We've also got a version which fills the hard drive up for you and tries to use a fixed level of CPU, but that's actually really hard to do in an effective way. And so we'll probably release the memory one and worry about the others later. So if we don't have it, you can write it yourself in 15, 20 lines. I have no more giveaways, but I'm happy to take questions. Really? We're done? Okay, go ahead.
So if I have Visual Studio on my machine, I don't have a TFS server. Can I still do that test case management stuff? Or is that kind of...
So if you don't have TFS, can you still do test case management? No. So the coded UI test does not require TFS. You could just launch that recorder that when I did the Silverlight example, you could just launch the recorder, record the app, and off you go. But the test case management system, test cases are actually work items. So they're a peer of bugs and tasks and stuff like that. So you need a TFS server. But the licensing has changed in 2010 that if you have, depending on which licensing agreement you have, if you have a client SKU, so if you have like Visual Studio Premium, you have a license for TFS. Done. If you have Test Professional, which is the SKU that MTM comes in, you have a license for TFS. You don't need to buy it separately. It comes with the client SKUs. Now it depends which agreement you have and an SA and all sorts of stuff like that. But for you, it may no longer be a separate purchase. It may be, but it may no longer be a separate purchase. We have some companies where what they're doing is they're just going to put TFS in for bug management, bug and test case management for now, and then the developers may or may not use source control and things like that later. All right, folks, I think the bar is beckoning. Feel free to ask me questions on email or Twitter, and I hope you enjoy whatever remains of your time in Vegas.